playing nice.
Cool it, yo, you cold as ice.
Wait till I get them off the side.
Let's get 'em with a spike.
I don't think they've realized
This is only half a fight.
when we're combined that we're climbing, then we're not afraid of heights.
And you can meet us at the top.
If they wonder where we've been,
Then we might just kick you off.
but we'll say that it's the wind.
Just by coding them in front.
From the moment we begin, yeah, we hardly call it fair, but a win is a win.
BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions here, and let's talk. There are 5 types of losers: the Ku Klux Klan, racist cosplay gatekeepers, people who defend slavery, characters and fictional people of color in love triangles and romance subplots, and yaoi battle shonen romance shippers. 3 of those deserve it, 1 of them deserves better, and 1 of them is doomed to lose. I'll let you figure out which ones deserve so. So, romance in shonen and Shonen Jump. I've talked about romance numerous times and romance manga every now and then, and I like my battle shonen, hobby anime, and traditional Jump, and even those outside of Shonen Jump. However, one of the issues people have with romance when it comes to battle shonen is that the romances feel underdeveloped, or in some cases, the lead girl, sometimes guys that the story is pairing with them, are also underdeveloped. Now, some of you are wondering, why is that a bad thing? Who cares about women or romance? Ain't it just a toxic ground for shippers? Well, romance is a part of characterization and plotting. A romance has to be believable and work within characterization, while also being plotted out to be engaging enough. It's just really another element of writing, like arguing if the relationship between best friends, rivals, and or family is strong and believable. And romance is a genre that has a lot of criticism across both hemispheres. Romantasy is popular over here in the West, but people complain that the leads are either boring, cliche, or underdeveloped, and people clearly care about characters from the East, especially in battle shonen, which is why their romances are the most criticized. But read shoujo, I hear someone yell. But I heard this idea that shonen has better plot, while shoujo has better reason to care about the characters. And I don't agree. A good plot in shoujo pushes the characters into endearing romantic situations, and a good plot in shonen pushes the characters to get better and improve while connecting with each other. Regardless of a story, a good romance or subplot should do 2 things: have the plot give a reason why the characters interact, and make the interactions meaningful. And I feel like you can do that in a genre about fighting terrible people by meeting good people. I joked about it before, but part of the reason there's so many yaoi battle shonen romance shippers from Naruto and Sasuke to Bakugo and Deku is because there's an intensity between the 2 leads to the point of fixation and obsession that, while unhealthy, do offer the character chemistry and relationship more time to grow and have more dynamics. When it feels like between the protagonist and the heroine, there tends to be less of that, regardless of if they are the love interests. Plus, someone's going to argue that shonen and Shonen Jump media are for boys, but in reality, a show that's just really good will attract people to that level of quality. That's not to say every writer does that, since some shows are catered for one demographic, but can also entirely attract an entirely different one. Pokemon, for example, appeals to battle shonen fans, most fans, and people who like cute creatures, those interested in the adventure of the series, world-building nuts, shippers, and people who play the game. And just because something is meant for boys or girls does not mean that writers have to or should write the opposing gender worse. Like, what are we saying? Men can't write women? Aren't they supposed to be the better gender? Because between action shows like Precure, Sailor Moon, and Nanoha, there are male characters who are written just as well as the men in supportive, helpful, and ally roles. And while it's gotten better on the men's side, clearly things can still improve. Guys need female role models outside of their mom. But I haven't explained battle couples yet, have I? Battle couples are basically a duo of people romantically interested in each other that are just really good at or have to work together in a lot of combat situations. Think about having a married or dating couple of officers or military or martial artists, but with a lower mortality rates. This can apply to criminals a la the outlaw couple, villains in unholy matrimony, a human and non-human, and yes, even battle harems. But for this video, we're only going to mostly look at the heroines and heroes of the story. Mostly. So, what makes a good romance or romantic subplot? I would say the characters who are supposed to end up together have a fair bit or amount of screen time together. I would say a decent balance of screen time where they have their own individual struggles, but also have time where they're together, and we get to see their chemistry, and we even see steps, even if it's small, that they can/will eventually get together. And the issue most people seem to have is that there doesn't seem to be enough of that. So in order to talk about how battle couples can save romance, heroines, and love interests in shonen, I want to talk about what the biggest problem is if we do see these battle couples, and how could the trope be improved upon or utilized in other stories by looking at some of the genres and titles that we have that are Shonen Jump and Shonen Jump related, alongside other mediums such as Tokusatsu and cartoons that actually come pretty close to having the idealized trope as well. If you made it this far, type battle couples are awesome, and let's get started. Now, usually whenever we talk about heroines who also happen to be love interests in shonen, the biggest talking points come down to whether or not they're only there to service the male lead, people claiming or having a crush on the main lead ruins their character, how effective they are in the story, if they have their own solo moments, and when it comes to the romance, is people feeling like it's undercooked. Most of those I agree with to some extent except for one, but I'll get to that when I can. But you want to know what's the main problem I almost never hear anyone bring up? Most of the time, the couple, or at least the one who ends up with the lead protagonist, barely spends any time with them because most of the time the love interest is either a supporting character or is a main character but is more underutilized and distanced from the main character for a fair amount of time. And if they're barely on screen together, there's barely any time to get invested in the relationship. Don't believe me? Let's start with part one, the main problem. Main protagonists are with supporting and side characters. Starting with Naruto and Hinata. I don't hate Naruto and Hinata, far from it. They grew up feeling isolated thanks to their conditions, and Naruto went from finding her weird to being open and honest about his fears and insecurities that he couldn't beat Neji, and he does everything wrong. But Hinata encourages him, pointing out that he inspires her with the proud failure line, and he admits that while he saw her as a weirdo, she's a person he really likes, and that was the only time in those moments Naruto expressed explicit doubt in himself to someone else. Plus, you have other moments like her offering her paper to help him cheat, the ointment she offered, and no, Kiba was being treated by medical physicians. She didn't abandon her friend for a guy. She also had to save him from pain and him being relieved that he didn't kill her while in his 6 to 8 tail form, and the snap out from Neji's sacrifice, as well as the hand holding. The major problem is that Hinata is only relevant in any of the big arcs where a large group of characters are gathered together. The Chunin exams arc, the Invasion of Pain arc, and the War arc. And most of her issues with her clan are hinted at, but are underexplored until the last. And I know the very loving and nuanced members of the Naruto community have never stopped talking about how divisive the last is, but I'm glad they had the opportunity to give Naruto and Hinata some focus both together, and Hinata to have more of a plot role in regarding her clan. Like, outside of one issue I kind of get, this was also the first time Naruto in the film used the combination Rasengan with a character from the manga that's official, and even took her sister's eye back. But I do wish that she had a hand-to-hand fight alongside Naruto against Toneri, and I don't even necessarily blame Naruto and Sakura shippers for preferring them, since those two spend more time together because they're on the same team. That being said, Hinata and Sakura get along better than the people who actually fight over which one should be with Naruto. So be more like the characters and less of the fans. But yeah, Hinata definitely could have had more screen time, but just wasn't in the main cast. Now, in comparison to Hinata, Orihime is in the main cast, and I like her dynamic with Ichigo. Orange hair being bully targets, lost family members, sweethearts who attract dubious scientists. But the big problem with her is that she and Ichigo almost spent like every arc separated from each other for like a good half after the first one. And Ichigo's feelings are more tied into protection than him admitting his feelings, but I'd argue Kubo was just being too subtle with him. And to be fair, the Kidnap Rescue arc showed her chemistry. The start of the Blood War, where she opens the window so Ichigo could kick the Stern Rider out of the room, would have been in the video had it not been static. And by the end, they do actually form a battle couple against your watch, which is awesome to see, and they get married at the end of it. If they weren't separated for so long in the story and Orihime's powers were fleshed out outside of her, just her healing, I feel like I would consider it decent. Then there's Goku and Chi-Chi was barely around in the original Dragon Ball. And no, while she can be overbearing, I ain't gonna crap on a mom for just wanting her kids and husband to be safe. But yeah, she doesn't have Saiyan strength, so she can't help out that much. And personal anecdote, at work I had someone actually not know who Chi-Chi was, and their friends all looked at them like they were crazy, but to be fair, they weren't into Dragon Ball that often. They kind of just know about the show based on clips and reels. But it kind of shows that some casual people can't even tell you the name of one of the most iconic fictional characters' wives if they're in the support role for too long. Yuji and Yuko Ozawa are like the perfect example of what I'm talking about, because just because I'm talking about battle couples does not mean I think Jujutsu Kaisen should have had her become a sorcerer, since while having minor characters in the world develop curse energy and help out would be kind of cute if it was her and Yuji doing some small missions, but JJK gets enough flack for its female characters being underused, and Yuko kind of gets thrown into the slander void despite doing nothing wrong, since a lot of people like the downtime and her chapters just being wholesome. And there are a lot of people who ship Nobara and Yuji even though they have a pretty good platonic friendship, which is a sign people do want a female lead who is capable and can back up the main lead in downtime and combat, which is kind of hard to do if you're a supporting character that's also a love interest that doesn't get involved in the plot. Remind me to talk about Yuta and Maki later, and Yuji and Nobara later. Tanjiro and Kanao are sadly the characters I have the least experience with, since I have not kept up with Demon Slayer all that much, though I've enjoyed what I've read. But from what I've found, the general consensus is that no one really has a problem with these two being together by the end. But from what I've heard, a lot of people just wish that Kanao had more spotlight or went on one of the big missions with the Power Quartet, like the Swordsmith Village or Entertainment District Arch, which I can empathize with. Now, part 2 are ones where I think these could work, but they all have something holding them back. For this section, I'm going to talk about instances where it's not necessarily the fact that they're together that's the problem, but usually there's like one aspect that's preventing them from actually fulfilling the battle couple trope. Okay, Sakamoto days. Now, you think I'm going to sign the Sakamoto days for this, but no. I actually do like Sakamoto's relationship with his wife, and that's part of the initial premise, was that he was trying to keep her safe from all these incidents without letting her be aware of it. But from what I've seen, the story kind of looks like it goes away from her and the family, which isn't inherently a bad thing, but I have seen some people point out that it kind of misses the setup. But that's kind of what happens when there's serial escalation. But I do want to talk about Sakamoto days because there are situations where two characters are practically together and they do compete in combat together besides them. Okay, I need people to understand this when it comes to Natsu and Lucy from Fairy Tail. They are practically together, but Mishima is one of the biggest trolls in manga writing history. He has written an alternate version of these two where one pairing from a parallel world did it inside their car and ended up with a baby years later. I am not joking about that. And another pair is a movie producer and a star who have fun backstage. And I don't even need to bring up the caveman alternate version or the art he made for fun with them. Or the fact that in the final chapter of the original series, she wants to kiss him, but Mishima always writes him to be completely obtuse, and how she's never worried about another girl being interested in him because he's too dense to even get it. The worst part is that they're actually pretty close to what I'm looking for mostly. Both of them naturally have their own individual arcs and battles to shine. They've worked together as a duo on missions since Happy's kind of useless sometimes. She saved him on numerous occasions, including rewriting the book that was supposed to end with his death and save his life, which is something I cannot say for a vast majority of heroines. Hell, they even defeated the final villain together because he killed Agnologia spirit form, only thanks to her plan to trap them with the dragon's weakness and motion sickness, combined with her allies leading her magic in order to paralyze his soul for Mr. Protac to shatter his soul. That is one of the few times I've ever seen a girl and guy combo actually be responsible for defeating the final antagonist, and it's a shame it's not talked about more. The only problem is that the guy who writes this is a troll who likes to mess with his readers, and while he's not sexist, he's just extremely horny on main. But at least he can make a decent enemies to lovers based on Godzilla and Levi, and his other relationships are believable for the most parts. And I know I said I was going to be talking about main characters, but even background characters can end up in a relationship if you set it up right. Alzak and Bisca were in the background for Fairy Tail, but they took on missions together before they married. They're literally a good pair because their marksmanship is pretty damn good. They see jealousy over other relationships because they were too afraid to actually get into one. And when Half the Guild disappeared, they ended up deciding to marry during the time skip and had their daughter, and they still help out. Well, besides, why wouldn't you want to marry a baddie who ends up helping someone take down an army general with a nuke? Also, fun fact, their actors have been married since 2008, and they managed to keep it a secret for like 2 and 8 years respectively. It's pretty impressive. Okay, Shaman King is in a weird situation because Yo and Anna are engaged to be married, and back then it did play into the abusive girlfriend joke. Though in Anna's situation, given the circumstances behind her powers, having someone like Yo was really the best option for her, and she does help out a whole ton, from training him to getting the spirits ready to work with the spirit train in the final battle. But they don't exactly fight together since she basically operates as a manager of the group. But considering this is the girl who literally slapped her future husband's evil twin in the face and got away with it, I kind of give her some props there. Alright, Gohan and Videl are interesting because in the subplot with Gohan having to adjust to life, it does make kind of sense he would end up with the first female friend that he's actually ever made that's around his age, especially given everything they went through. And the fact that they got married is pretty sweet, but the only problem is because Dragon Ball is very centered around fights, and if you don't have golden hair or as an antagonist, it can't really contribute much. Videl kind of gets sidelined in her debut arc, but I do like the Super episode since it does focus on the relationship and the fact that she knows her husband wouldn't cheat. Shame a lot of people hated that one. But I would totally love a side spin-off plotline where both of them, as Saiyaman and Saiyawoman, go around stopping crime. Because a lot of Videl's movesets in games are mostly centered around that, with Gohan backing her up. And they act more like a battle couples in the games than they do in the show, since you actually have control of the character, like in Fighter Z. Nanoha and Fate. Oh, I finally get to talk about lyrical Nanoha on the channel because there is a weird sense of enemies to friends to lovers. Because those of you who are unfamiliar with Nanoha, the White Devil was trying to get the jewel seed from the wrong hands, and her future girlfriend Fate was one of those wrong hands. But to make a long story short, Fate was a clone of the main antagonist's daughter, who's been using her to try to get the items to break reality and revive her true daughter, and Fate was basically killing herself to help a mother who was using her and never loved her. It basically took Nanoha having to fight and save her, her mother disowning her, her best friend going to Nanoha Konoha, who was going to help her anyway, and her future brother and mom all helping her turn on her for fate to change and help the hero stop her mother from her insanity. And while you could call it Stockholm Syndrome, the fact that she's still grateful to her mother for her existence is signs that she's a better person than the one who made her. Then they basically teamed up and bonded while trying to help out a whole group of victims and managed to save them. Oh, and 10 years later, they ended up raising a child together while stopping another terrorist plot. And I know what you're thinking. It sounds good, so why is it not in the close tier for me? Okay, TRDL, way back in the 2000s, anyone who tried writing an LGBTQ plus couple had to have a lot of subtext to get it past censors because both sides of the hemisphere have a surprising amount of homophobia. So it's unknown if this was planned from the very beginning. There are basically enough subtext for some fans to question and debate, wait, are these two a couple? Which I didn't pick on, but I'll talk about it. Now, this debate would have gone on for a while until the guy who made the series got the voice actresses for both of them for an interview and basically confirmed that they were a married lesbian couple raising their daughter. He literally describes them as Nanaha being the stay-at-home mom, while Fate is the father working away at home after they're done fighting evil. So they actually come pretty close to fitting my quota. I mean, both of them have opposing starts but are still capable in battle. Their relationship grows by fighting against each other but also end up working together. They've also been able to divide and conquer to achieve the same goal, and we did see them become friends. So even if I didn't see the subtext, given she basically saved her future wife from her toxic relationship that could have ended her and helped her find a new family in life, it's really not that hard for me to buy that they would end up in a romantic relationship. So they do kind of fit the criteria that I'm looking for. Miraculous Ladybug, regardless of what you think, are the weirdest example of this trope being half true and half not. They aren't a couple but have romantic feelings for the other's different identity, only to end up as a couple but aren't aware that they fight together. Now, outside of one stalking and entitlement issues, I don't have a problem with these two getting together despite the road to it being one season too long. Personally, condense season 3 and 4 into one season and then let them date Luke and Kagami a bit more before they break up. But in terms of balancing their individual and team moments, Cat Noir needs more battles where either he takes the lead or is the main cause of defeating the Akumatai's victim, or defeating it, because Cataclysm can destroy Nakuma since seasons 4 through 5 were about Cat being her ultimate partner. But despite some valid criticisms I have, they're on the right track of this trope. Oh, I've been saving this conversation for a while. To make a long story short, I was more familiar with the Mega Man NT Warrior anime more than the Mega Man Battle Network games. And actually, like Layton and Meilu's relationship, they were the only sane people dealing with a cast of crazies, and Lan did show a bit of an attraction before it was slightly ambiguous, with Meilu starting to get either jealous or more concerned about helping him in spite of her skills. Not to mention Mega Man EXE and Roll were pretty well overall, and in Axis, there was a date episode where Meilu wanted to help out Lan by cross-fusing. While Meilu was the only member of Lan's friend group in the main cast still active in Axis, she wasn't helping out as much as she used to, and the cross-fusion attempt was something that would have helped with the Proto Man under Dark Soul arc, yet it didn't happen, and a lot of people from different parts of the world actually wish she had gotten it. Naturally, you'd think that in the games that they were based off, and that Meilu, Dex, and Yai were basically his allies in the first 3 games, and for the 5th game, where the anime would adapt into its own storyline with Stream, that required a total of 13 characters, 6 newcomers, and 7 veterans, with Mega Man and Proto Man's operators being chosen, you would think they'd pick her for either team since she's helped Lan fight terrorists in both mediums, right? Nope. For some reason, after the 3rd game, Lan's friends all got demoted to being background support and hostages, and to make it even worse, both Team Colonel and Team Proto Man have room for a support member. You'd think Meilu and Roll EXE, who's got virus busting, healing chips, and good variety of chips alongside her natural antenna and arrow skills, would be a great choice. Nope. In Team Colonel, they use Robita and Toadman, which, hey, we don't shade good faith journalists on this channel who risk their lives for the news. And Team Proto Man introduces us to Jasmine and Medi, which I saw a fair bit of people give flack to Jasmine because her needing to care for her sick grandfather was apparently too selfish, and Medi's skill set ain't that good in combat. But the problem is, we're just pitting 2 women against each other for reasons that weren't each other's faults. Thankfully, the anime and Stream actually fixed this by switching out Higsby, no shade, he cool, and Robita, who also got less to do sadly, for Meilu and Misiri, the latter of which was able to help out given her stronger ties to the main antagonist for the anime, and Meilu actually got to be more active. While there were some dumb moments with her character, when she cross-fused with Roll thanks to Dex, she was able to help Mega Man beat Video Man, who's usually hard to beat. Jasmine got more to do, and Meilu had to deal with her jealousy as she helped Mega Man beat Starman, and against Neo World 3's final gambit to drop satellites in episode 40, she talks about how Lan wanted her to lend her strength, saying, "Before now, all I could do was cheer him on from the sidelines, but I could never really do anything. I've already decided I finally gotten the same power that Lan has, so I'm going to use it to help him." One bathroom joke later, she gets her second win and flat out summons the equivalent of a black hole in Rush Hole and deletes Desert Man, who, need I remind you, almost killed Lan last season, and its implied asteroid navies are stronger than traditional ones. Yeah, she basically helped stop the final terrorist scheme. Well, done by humans, they weren't in high school yet. But You mostly fall into the group role for a while, though she still helps out in Beast, but the romance doesn't really get that much focus on. Though in Battle Network 6 or somewhere onwards, it's confirmed they do have a child in the future. So it's nice, but with a bit more effort, this would have been a great example of a battle couple. Next up is Geo and Sonya from Mega Man Star Force. Are Geo and Sonya a little bit better, but a little bit worse in some areas, and highlights why this trope would help better. Geo started off Star Force mostly depressed and isolated thanks to the loss of his father to space, and Omega's just being partially responsible, and the games and anime take similar routes, with him slowly becoming more adjusted, saving his future classmates from the FMANs who then take over, and Sonya started off being abused by her manager and her mother died, which the anime for kids had to tone down into her being more rebellious against a strict manager, and in the games they help each other out a lot, while in the anime she starts assisting him in battles after a bit. We're usually shipping up to help him out. The game focuses more on their romance than the anime does, minus a few scenes, but the anime has her be the energetic one to Geo's more reserved nature, which both variations are valid, so what's the problem? Well, usually in the Mega Man Battle Network and Star Force games, you really only play as Mega Man until Battle Network 5, and sometimes the other characters will help out in cutscenes or moments, but you don't really get a chance to see it all that often. In Star Force, Harp joins the villains as a sort of fake defector, and a lot of people didn't like that. But in Star Force 2 animation adaptation Tribe, she basically goes around with Geo's adventures. But the problem there is that she doesn't really get her own arc or major battle to focus on, which, fair enough, she's not the protagonist, and the game really didn't give her that many reasons to do so. But in Star Force 3, she's the only main character outside of Zack whose mega cards are absent. You can't get Harp noise when the FMBNs are associated with Geo's friends return as noise forms, and Taurus Fire gets to help out Geo during Diamond Ice's dungeon, and you can fight him as an optional boss, but Harp Note doesn't get that opportunity. And you wanna know what makes this worse? Diamond Ice's human Belle is an aspiring idol and admirer of Sonya, who works hard, but Ice is the one who pushes her to be a rival to Sonya. So the villains give her a card that allows them to transform into Diamond Ice and use that to attack Sonya's concert. But Sonya doesn't get to help out Geo, who is essentially the mirror counterpart. The anime stopped being made after Tribe, and I heard that was supposed to also get 55 episodes for season 2, but was cut down to 21. But if they had managed to make an adaptation of the third game, I feel like the anime team would have given that arc to Harp Note and be a Harp Note focused one where she takes a lead in defeating Diamond Ice. Now, that being said, the fact that she still be able to be a part of the hero team in the third game while still being relevant in all the games in the anime definitely shows that the franchise was improving in that regard. With hindsight, we can only take the lessons from there, since they did have a potential to be a really good battle couple. And speaking of couples that can require humans transforming, so for my montage, if you're watching the special version of this video, need to make sure I avoid copyright. You probably noticed that I use Tokusatsu clips, and if you're wondering why I included it in a video about Shonen Jump, Heroines, and Romance, well, basically Tokusatsu is live-action battle shonen, but I didn't use that many, which is weird because Kamen Rider doesn't do romance all that much, and Power Ranger does, so how come I didn't use anything for Power Rangers? Well, Super Sentai tends to focus on teams, so there aren't a ton of Ranger teams where two of the heroes end up in a relationship. And even if they do, half the time it's either towards the end of the series, or if they do have a love interest that's earlier, they're not exactly a ranger, though you do see a civilian or supporting character, or sometimes they even end up with a villain. Like, I love Kira Major, the episode where Drew and Kakihara get stuck together and basically end up isolating the glue monster so Yellow and Silver can beat it to death with a hammer made of all the things that were stuck together. And the plan only came together because Drew and Kakihara spent the episode bonding and understanding each other is a lot of fun. And she's still holding on to me even after the monster was destroyed. Isn't love beautiful? And to be fair to Sentai, there are a few Ranger examples I can talk about. For example, from what I know of Mega Ranger, Yellow and Black had feelings for each other, and they had the episode where Chisato made Kochido act as her boyfriend to get her grandmother to stop her from being in an arranged marriage. Jetman is kind of close to this since they do have a love triangle between Red, White, and Black, with Red and White winning out. And it was also a love triangle because Inoue, but also Red's original girlfriend was basically kidnapped and turned into a general by one of the main villains, and one of her other generals ended up developing feelings for her. Koryuger had Purple with a crush on Red, but towards the end, Pink and Red ended up with feelings for one another. Deca Ranger had Green and Pink eventually end up getting married, although I heard that was after the show ended. And Koryuger had a relationship between Koryu Blue and Candela towards the end, but she's not a hero, though she switched sides by the ends, and turns out years later they ended up together, so that's cute. But you don't really see two heroes from the beginning slowly become a couple and kick butt. So let's look at Power Rangers. Obviously you have Tommy and Kimberly, and later Kat. In Space had Andros and Ashley, which started off with them being opposites attract and opening up to each other more to the point where they ended up on a date. Time Force had Wes and Jen, and their whole plotline with him being the ancestor of her fiance who died, then got revived due to timeline changes, and she ended up realizing she loved Wes more. RPM had Summer and Dylan, and they lampshaded the hell out of the good girl and brooding bad boy trope. Though they did executed it pretty well, given that this is an aloof cyborg searching for his missing loved one, and she was hardened from going to being a spoiled girl to a well-meaning hero after losing her butler, who wanted her to live up to her potential, and they went on missions together. They even ended up leaving alongside his sister when the story was over. Dino Charge probably has the most consistent example of what I'm looking for, since Tyler and Shelby ended up meeting by accident when they were both searching for fossils, and ended up finding the energems for their powers, with them transforming together for the first time. And with the monster, they ended up having a mutual attraction to each other, and even acted upon it for a cosplay plan with a cheek kiss. She also wished for a date for him, and by the end of the show, they almost lip kiss. I'll talk about why they didn't, but after that point, they started acting like a couple. But Ninja Steel kind of dropped the ball with this one, and this runs into some of the problems that you can have when it comes to battle couples if you don't try. Calvin and Haley are the first Ranger duo to be a couple at the start of the season and stay that way until the very end. The problem is, and thanks to all the executive mandates, neither one was given enough character development to flesh out their personality or dive deeper into their personal goals in season 1 outside of one good example. With Haley getting the worst because any character focus episode she would get would either be shared with her and another Ranger, where she'd be the less focus of the duo, or it'd be with Calvin. He would have the focus, but it was either to show that he was making mistakes as a boyfriend or barely progressing his car plot. The only exceptions are the episode where he gets kidnapped and she has to save him, and in the finale where he gets brainwashed thanks to his actions, but the show blames her for it even though he was in the wrong, and she literally has to fight and save him. They do fight together thanks to stock footage, but the problem was that Ninja Steel didn't adapt most of the moments where their counterparts worked together, and in the Ninja, Yellow and White were cousins and Red and White were more closer as brother and sister, so there wasn't a lot of stock footage for Yellow and White to work together. And season 2 did try to flesh out their relationship, but Calvin ended up just coming across as a jerk who never grew or changed, while Haley also ended up being underused throughout the show. I have an entire video about how the show could have handled these two a lot better, which I'll leave in the comments. The last 2 seasons tried to shake things up. Beast Morphers gave us Blue breaking up with his girlfriend because part of the rules is that Rangers weren't allowed to date, and when she gets infected by the villain, she ends up with a duplicate of all her toxic traits, and he spent season 1 trying to get her back and eventually succeeds in the finale. But in season 2, she's retired and doesn't really get to play that much of a role in the story. However, we did get 2 Rangers, Nate and Zoe, who had a few hints they were into each other, since he's more reclusive and usually stays in since he's the tech whiz behind the Ranger system, while she's more ambitious but lost out on the Ranger program because she was also busy while working on marine life and saving the environment. And the 2 eventually ended up going on a date, but that's against the rules, so season 2 eventually has them having to confront that to their boss. But the only downside was that there wasn't a lot of episodes building up to them in season 1, and in season 2 she mostly acts as his confidant, and she really doesn't have that much story-driven episodes. But still was a decent improvement. And Dino Fury kind of went for a pseudo rivals to lovers, since Ollie and Amelia are on the tech skeptic versus spiritual side, which eventually saw Ollie hurting her so badly emotionally that he ended up realizing that he actually does have feelings for her and made up for it, with them becoming a couple. So if I have good things to say about Power Rangers, then what's my issue? For starters, because it's a team show, some of the Sentai won't have enough fight footage where it's both of them working together or having a finishing move together, since even Sentai has a budget to work with and Power Rangers doesn't have the money to constantly make original footage like that. Next is the fact that Power Rangers has had both mandates that the Rangers aren't allowed to kiss each other on the lips, with Tommy and Kimberly being the only exception, and it's very annoying that a dynamic that's built on mental, emotional, and physical intimacy is robbed on the physical intimacy. Yeah, for all my Ninja Steel fans, Calvin and Haley were supposed to kiss, but they cut it out. Heck, for some of the Disney seasons, according to Trent's actor, Trent and Kira's relationship was originally supposed to go somewhere and have a payoff down the line, but Disney had anti-romance policies that were allegedly so bad that the two weren't even allowed to have any bodily contact, which is weird because Ninja Storm had Tori and Blake's relationship and was actually pretty cute, and he even got to admit his feelings to her. Like, they actually had moments where they got to bond. The only reason I didn't talk about either one of them is because they don't really have a lot of fight footage together, which is also part of the problem. The funny thing is that the focus episodes exclusively for Power Rangers do help with making sure that the characters stand out on their own, so it really comes down to just them getting enough battle time as a couple. But some of these examples actually have a pretty good foundation for a good battle couple, it just needs to be more fleshed out in certain areas. But let's move on to Kamen Rider, because I actually want to talk about 3 examples that I have. First off is Len and Case from Kamen Rider Dragon Knight. Yeah, we've had writers go on dates before, but this is the first time the franchise ever had 2 writers actively involved in a plot and dating. Len has been there since from the beginning, and we see that he was cold because he basically lost almost all his fellow soldiers and fellow writers since they were betrayed and their powers were taken by the guy responsible to give to their duplicates. And it took him a while to warm up to the main protagonist since he has the same face as the person who betrayed him. But she had also survived, and when she returns into the show, you actually see that he's a lot nicer and calmer when he's around her, but she's not exactly fond of the main protagonist, and he tries to help both of them realize that they need to give the other credit. And Len and Case fight together pretty well. They end up saving each other from the main villain several times, and when she gets knocked down and comatose, he uses that as fuel in order to take down the person responsible. And when they get her back, she still managed to work together with everyone else through the final battle. It's not perfect, but it's a pretty solid attempt at a battle couple. Now, before I talk about Kamen Rider Gotchard duel examples, I am going to note that both of these pairings have feelings for one another, but neither one has been official, but they are considered love interests to each other, since I might put them on the thumbnail. I'll start with Spanner and Lacus' relationship, since she started out as a villain since the sisters are basically after a bunch of creatures and cards are made from alchemy, and he was someone born into alchemist society and lost his parents to her father. But he's basically kind of arrogant and doesn't necessarily respect the powers that give him the ability to transform, or most of his allies, and part of his development is about realizing a true hero values and protects all forms of life. And she goes from attempting to fight and flirt with him to realizing that her own family doesn't care about her that much, and feeling bad for his backstory and suffering, she eventually joins the good guys in stopping her father, and eventually she ends up using Spanner's old power set, and the two end up working together a few times. The second part of the show revolves around finding about her origins as a human as their subplot, though she also wants to keep her sisters alive so they can also become human like she was. And Spanner spends part of the final arc trying to act like a martyr instead of realizing that everyone else wants him to live, including her. And part of that allows him to rebuild his powers to take on one of the final bosses. But after that, she gets killed by her father, and in her final moments, she admits she wants to become human so they could be together. And at the end of the show, he plans on working on a way to revive her. It's not bad for enemies to lovers romance, but the only problem is that after she turns good, they don't really have a lot of scenes where they're working together on the battlefield, and she ends up being a little bit underused because she doesn't fight as often as he does. And the problem that you could run into a battle couple is if it's one member of the couple doesn't get as much to do as the other, it can make the relationship feel imbalanced. But it does have a solid template to execute enemies to lovers for an action series, if one were to build upon it. So let's talk about Kamen Rider Gotchard. So I've talked about the hero and heroine before, Hotaro and Rene. To make a long story short, Hotaro isn't an alchemist who ends up jumping into the world, befriending the creatures she and Spanner need to collect, and he ends up having the power to transform with them, while she has to rely on just her powers as an alchemist. She's very cold and aloof at the start, and we quickly learn it's because her father, who he met, left the organization to prevent the creatures, and at the time, the villains had claimed that he died, and Hotaro did technically see him die in front of his eyes. So she's breaking down, and despite how cold she's been to him, he gets her to open up more, swaying her into remembering her passion came from her father's fate, and they work together. He also tries to cook for her every now and then, and she starts being more friendly with him. The conclusion of the first two arcs ends with her taking him privately to admit she was being guilt-tripped by her arch nemesis, who claimed her father was alive, and he points out that it wasn't her fault, but going forward he wants to be someone she can lean on, and basically they make a declaration of protection to each other, leading to her giving her arch enemy a bit of a mental breakdown and helping him turn the tide. She gets resolved to get her own power-up, saving the city in the movie, but he gives her the advice to help her transform from her own convictions in the show. They do bring up a potential love triangle only for her to prove that she and him are a great match, and in the final arc, not only do they kick butt together, she ends her arc ultimately end up earning her arch enemy's trust to defeat the final boss, who expected the two of them to die thanks to the confidence he helped her build up. They even hold hands at the end of the series. The only problem is that this show relies heavily on the main characters usually teaming up together to take on a big threat, say for a few moments, where both of them will take an L, but he ends up getting the power-up. And in Kamen Rider, Rider tends to give its characters multiple forms, and she kind of ends up having the least amount out of the three. So most of her big moments usually come from team events outside of her personal final boss. But they almost fit the criteria for an ideal battle couple. They have the awkward extrovert and even more introvert work together. There's an implied mutual attraction, and when they have their own solo moments, they shine. So if my only problem is that she needs more individual moments and are one or two more forms, why am I hesitating on calling them a battle couple? The only reason they're not a couple is because half the people working on the show are signs the industry has an ongoing problem where the men are cowards at any attempts at writing romance, and any male writer who attempts to break the status quo or actually improve at writing good romance is going to have some sort of ridiculous pushback. Don't believe me? I am not making this up, and I've talked about this before on the channel. There were practically three different factions in the production team. One was led by the co-writer with more experience and the assistant producer on the show who believed their relationship was more romantic and wrote it to have that context and subtext. Then the second faction was led by the co-writer with less experience and the producer who believed that they were just friends, with a third faction rooting for the love to be unrecruited. So the director had to come in and find a middle ground, claiming the relationship was a greater love that encompasses them that aligned with the fans' view. So open to interpretation. Like, there's a part of me that just wants to laugh about how absurd that there was a civil war in the writer's room over just 100% confirming a romantic couple. And you know my stance on this already. If you invest that much of the writing into the connection and bond with the very implications, don't be a coward and just commit to romantic relationships. Yeah, relationships don't start by people not doing anything. Media meant for boys and shonen would really benefit from having romance, not just to show young boys role models of all genders, but also show that women are more than just partners or passive figures, but are as equals with their own struggles and identity to respect and empathize with, just as we do. Plus, the stronger the character, the stronger the romance between the two leads will be. That's why this couple ended up having a really, really strong following online, especially in the Eastern Hemisphere. A lot of people can connect to an introvert solely following her self-worth, hobbies, confidence, and love to support as someone who accepts them in spite of their flaws. They still had their own insecurities and hardships who took the time to understand each other and bring out the best sides in each other. And isn't that what we want? People developing strong connections with another and working together to take down terrible people to bring some sort of goodness in the world? If you made it this far and you're a Kamen Rider fan, type Hotarine in the comments. Oh, yeah, the kiss. There's a reason why these two didn't even have a kiss, though. 19-year-old male actor and 17-year-old female actress, if there's an age imbalance, typically you don't have them kiss in live-action production. Hence why they made a joke about it in the TTFC Romeo and Juliet play, where their roles had him ready and willing, but she kneed and slapped him. Oh, yeah, and there's another reason why the kiss was cut, which comes down to cultural norms. Don't believe me? Let's talk about Pokemon. Hey, remember in Pokemon XYZ where Serena became the first human to kiss Ash on the lips, but they positioned it at an angle where it can be ambiguous, but everyone watching and the other characters there could notice? Yeah, see, in Japan, displays of affection such as hugs and kisses are more encouraged to be done in private, with doing so in a public place, aka an airport, would be frowned upon. So, just in case some kid saw an uncensored version and wanted to replicate it, while it wouldn't be a crime, it would be seen as a social taboo. Personally, I get it, even though I think that's overblown, but that's one way to do it. In the comment section, type civil or more shipping because that leads into my next point. While that's not everyone in the anime Pokemon community, there are some people who only see Serena as a ship prop for Ash instead of her own character, and while there are criticisms to be had about her journey, Serena is her own character, and it's because of the individuality that she should be allowed to stand out more. And especially after an episode with Journeys focusing on her helping out Chloe a lot, people showed their rares and forgot that Ash was the motivator for her to even focus on her contests and showcases. And while her feelings for him did push her to become better, she is still her own person at the end of the day. And that's why for battle couples, writers need to make sure that the female characters has their own individuality and acts upon it. As for whether or not I will talk about these two as a battle couple, I mean, he does inspire her to actually get involved and find her dream, which he eventually does, but he's more of a battler while she's more of a performer. Now, that's not to say they don't work together, but usually them working together in a battle is usually resolved around a big conflict or something. And let's just say I'm used to people who kind of undermine the fact that the love interest has a crush on the protagonist, even if they have a lot of things going for them, and the criticism can provide a shallow view of how we see women. Speaking of which, it's finally time to talk about My Hero Academia and Boruto! Yay! So, I'll be talking about Deku and Uraraka and Boruto and Sadara because these two have the same problem when it comes to discourse. Ochako and Sadara are both scrutinized and touted as ruined and terrible characters for the terrible crime of having romantic feelings for a guy. Alright, let's smash this obstacle. Remember when I said I agree with the criticisms for shonen heroines for the most part except for one? Yeah, this was foreshadowing for this point. The problem has never been that female characters have a crush. The problem was that many of them were barely treated as characters, with their only role being tied to a man with no impact in the story or development. Take away the crush, and if the character is just underused, that's the actual problem to focus on. Otherwise, we're just unfairly criticizing the right for one gender to experience love when you almost never hear people say that a male character is ruined because of a female character. And in Ochako's case, the crush was never the problem, but at least in the first act of the series, she really could have been given more active roles to do, especially alongside her crush. Especially since her and Deku do have great moments together. They counterplayed Bakugo and Ida in the battle trial, saved each other's lives in the entrance exam, worked well in the sports festival, and her helping him during the joint training, bringing him back from vigilantism, and them talking about how they wanted to save their villain counterparts was good stuff. But there needed to be a little bit more between them so by the end they feel more or less equal, especially since they spent enough time apart to focus on the individual arcs in the second half. I talked about this before in a short, but I did say that having Uraraka join the fight against Stain would be great because her initial goal of being a hero for money to support her family is not just a selfish and selfless hybrid, but an ideological counter to Stain, whose belief that all forms of heroism should be altruistic in nature than relying on opportunists would make this a very nuanced exploration for both of them. Plus, and the antagonists are seen in a better light if they're able to take on multiple opponents at once, and I'd argue that having to fight 4 people would actually make him look stronger than just fighting 3. But I think the bigger problem was her lack of a role in the internship arc. And one of the criticisms was that her change in goal following Night Eye's death would have been more impactful had she done more in the arc. And I agree, but for different reasons. See, gang and gang violence are usually attributed to poverty, and one would naturally assume that's similar to the League. A good chunk of the gang comes from lower impoverished neighborhoods who join in order to survive, and out of loyalty. But only the loyalty part is fleshed out. And considering Deku and overall have a protect versus exploit mentality of others' lives, her antagonist having the ability of energy absorption references to the idea that one has to steal in order to survive. And as someone who wants a more ethical approach to sustainability, her goal evolving into being a supporter and savior of heroes and civilians would be a lot stronger if her antagonist of that arc was fleshed out. Eventually, criminalization often tends to get unfairly labeled onto certain groups of society as eventualities, despite never questioning the systems of that mentality leading to someone to make those decisions. And call it political or not, for both the hero and heroine who eventually realize this problem and have to work to it, MHA's use of her would have been stronger had, with the help of her allies, her role focused on her realization that the organization is the symptom of the problems alienating from the weaknesses in the systems at place. Since, like her, all of them started out as normal civilians, placed in the world, and their actions are based on how the world accommodated them. There's this idea that you just have to be one of the good ones, when that mentality hasn't saved innocent people who have never committed a crime in real life. And even by the PLW, she realizes the system has failed her adversaries, and the two's bonds are sharpened by the desire to break that flaw. And it's why I say the romance wasn't the problem. They have these conversations because they feel close enough with the other person to confide their thoughts into, furthering the point that the romance isn't the problem, she just needed more time in the story to use it as a stepping stone. I mean, I'm a dumb battle shonen fan who likes big, flashy, speedy, punchy kick boom booms with impact frames, themes, romance, and fleshing out characterization to elevate those aspects. Who needs them? Let's move on to Sadara. So, Sadara has gotten hate for so many questionable reasons, ranging from people who believed the Uchiha had never had sight problems despite Obito himself having eye problems, slut-shaming her because of her Part 2 outfit, people complaining that she won too much in the anime, people claiming she's a jobber in the anime when she loses despite having moments where she lost and won either on her own or in team fights, or people blaming her for mistakes other characters did, people being impatient with Tuvu Vortex and claiming that her not using the Mangekyo Sharingan on Mooks was a bad writing decision, and worst of all, claiming she's a bad character because she has feelings for Boruto. And yes, there are dumb debates about whether or not Boruto and Sadara eventually ending up together. Are the writers doing a hetero take on Naruto and Sasuke? Which is dumb. But the biggest question is, does Sadara's feelings for Boruto impact their character in a negative light, and would they fit the battle couple trope if they actually did? Regarding her feelings, no, I don't think it's a bad thing or people should be making fun of a fictional teenager for having feelings. Boruto and Sadara have known each other since they were little. They grew up bickering and having a childhood friend rivalry. According to the novelizations the anime was based on, part of the reason she became close to Boruto was because she started out being pretty shy and unable to fit in with the other children, of her parents' children. But Boruto ended up insisting that she join him and became one of her first friends, and despite how much they've argued and end up at odds, they've been together since. And with both the anime and the manga continuities, Boruto and Sadara work really damn well together. Even when they were at the academy, when someone got possessed, they came up with a strategy to beat him. They swayed Chojuro into dealing with the Mist Rebellion as a scuffle so he can deal with the leader while she takes on the second strongest. When they stopped getting in each other's way after arguing about being on the same team, they realized they work better together and managed to restrain Mirai. During the exams, he only cheats because he doesn't want her dream of being Kage trampled, and they make it to the finals together, resorting against a cheat after Shinki manhandled both of them and KO'd her after they came with a plan to beat him. And Boruto's growth that arc led him to want to be her right-hand man when she becomes Hokage. There's a time she saved him from Kako, and when they're stuck in a Genjutsu meant for both of them to kill each other, she uses the Sharingan on the blade meant to cut her head off to reflect it onto herself to break her body out of it, and then saves him out of it. And not only did they do well in the prison mission, she's the one leading the team against Boro and breaks his core. The problem was that the manga only had the Momoshiki, Mujina, Aoi, and Ishiki arcs, and after that, the story kind of focused on Boruto and Kawaki in part 1, dealing with Code and Irotsuki powers, leaving her and Mitsuki to realize that they need to get their own upgrades. And then she gets bodied against Kawaki without much of a fight, leading Boruto to get a scar. And with the Omnipotent switch forcing her friends to believe Kawaki and Boruto are the opposite person, when Kawaki sends Naruto and Hinata to another dimension, her MS awakens from the stress of Naruto being claimed dead, Sasuke about to kill Boruto, and Boruto being hunted down by almost all of their allies. So at least despite the issues, they were setting her up for part 2. And it's not like she's doing terrible in Tubu Vortex. While all the Claw Grimes start attacking, she's the only one of her generation able to fight them all for a while. And after Hidari manhandles everyone else, she's able to work with Boruto and Konohamaru to eventually defeat him. The Sand arc literally puts Boruto on the sideline so Sadara, Mitsuki, and Shinki's team can beat Shinki Shinju. Yet you have critics, and I use that term very, very loosely, blaming Sadara for the mistake Yodo caused, and when Yodo gets hurt, Sadara takes her advice to stop suppressing herself and obliterates Ryu with her new Mangekyo Sharingan ability. Which, fun fact, that ended up becoming the 4th most popular chapter on Manga Plus in 2025. Congrats! And even after all of that, and the fact that right now she's bodyguarding one of the antagonist targets, people are still making fun of her for having feelings for a boy. It's a shame because there are valid criticisms to be had and that she just needed to do more in Part 1's manga, but to hate on a character whose entire goal is to become a political leader like Naruto that revolves around connecting and opening up to people, trusting you to lead, it's pretty hypocritical to hate on a fictional teenager for the crime of having feelings for her best friend and teammate. That being said, I do hope that the two of them end up having a team up again, because part of the story revolves around the fact that Boruto really can't do this alone, and everyone else kind of has to level up alongside him if they have a chance of beating the rest of the Shinju. That's why everyone from Inojin to Shikadai Himawari are all either training or using Nijutsu to try and keep up. Now, some of you guys might be saying cyberpunks in the comments, but I kind of want the couple in question to actually live, and I haven't seen it for that reason, although if you think they count, let me know in the comments. Also, editing me here, I probably should have talked about the only Miyazaki film that I watched, and I do like Princess Mononoke, and I do like Ashitaka and Sai's relationship, though let me know which Miyazaki films you think handled this pretty well. Now, Skune and Mocha actually fit a mold regarding the battle couples with a power indifference at the start, since he started off as a human and she was a vampire. But thanks to a lot of elements in the plot, he starts getting the powers to start assisting her in fights, and throughout the season 2 manga, he actually progresses to the point where they're able to be equal and work together to take down some of the big bads together. And their feelings for each other have been there since the beginning, especially since he's been protecting him from the start, and he's helped her make more friends. Technically, the ending is a little ambiguous, but both sides of Mocha sort of end up with him at the end, so this is actually a pretty good example. Kirito and Asuna from Sword Art Online are a strange scenario since, I mean, they do work together, they do fall in love, and despite what people say about their relationship, it's pretty healthy and consistent. My only problem is that after season 1, the two don't really have that many major arcs together as far as I've watched, and I think she helps out in seasons after 3. I haven't watched that far enough to know, so let me know if you think that they fit this trope pretty well afterwards, but they have the setup, they just needed more moments for them to shine and have their own character arcs together. As for Yuta and Maki, from what I've seen of Jujutsu Kaisen, they definitely have chemistry, and I know from the manga they fight together. But I actually want to bring up Jujutsu Kaisen for a bit again. In the video game Curse Clash, a lot of the joint special moves were taken or based off what the characters did in the manga and the anime. And while it was cool to see replications for that be used in the attacks, there were some people who wished to diverge from canon and made some more for a few characters who do work together but don't have a joint, like Miwa and Mekamaru, Nobara and Megami, Yuji and Sukuna, but who did get one was Yuta and Maki, which was loosely based off the training they did in the movie and Zero, which was definitely cool to see, and stuff like that would actually be pretty cool to see if it was done more in canon. Aang and Kentara actually come close to this. They have their own mutual attraction, have their own individual storylines that correlate in improving their bending, and if the relationship can impact Aang's avatar training. And I do appreciate the character development, but the funny thing is they rarely fight side by side with just the two of them, which isn't a bad thing, mind you, but I feel like for a series where it was only like 3 to 5 human main characters, I feel like it could have had a few more moments where they worked together against a single opponent or two, because they did fight against Zuko and Azula together, but plot-wise it made sense for them to lose or retreat in that scenario. Also, Sokka and Suki did work together a few times, like in the Boiling Rock escape, and my saving Zuko from boiling lava is sick, but I would like to see the two of them do more missions as a couple. But a battle couple can still have flaws in some regards. Now, Ruby, the hate for the show can reach unbearable amounts, which is why people left the community. So I'm gonna say I had little issues with Blake and Sun or Blake and Yang hanging up together. For Blake and Sun, they had chemistry, worked together against Roman and the White Fang, and he helped her out of her self-doubt. Plus, while they didn't end up together, he actually showed that he cared about her. Then with Blake and Yang, they had issues because she left, and while there were some issues involving some execution that I'll get to, they resolved it teaming up against Adam, and between 7 through 9, which I need to finish 9, we had them work together, be separated, and in 9 they finally had to kiss. So what's the problem with these two? Well, with Blake and Sun, even Sun admits he kind of neglected his team, and we don't get that much introspection onto his character and backstory. He's just there to help out. And with Blake and Yang, I agree with the valid criticism against some of the execution implications of the White Fang, hence the decision to ignore it. But the downside of that is that they don't necessarily have their own individual arcs, to the point where I've seen people complain that Blake has no personality, or that they're basically a toxic codependent relationship, or they lost all of their personality. Look, I get why someone will come to that conclusion, but I doubt Yang still being a party girl would make sense given that they lost against Atlas. Never ask me my thoughts on Ruby as a whole. But the point is, you should also remember to have to give the couple their own arcs that can correlate with the couple being together, but still ultimately revolves around them. Now, for a few where I put them in a special opening, depending on which version you're watching, Krillin and Android 18's only sin is that they take a massive backseat to the adventures in the world midway through the Buu Saga and most of Super, but they at least had build up into being a couple, and they are cute, and Super actually did some cool things with them. I talked about the power imbalance before, and Krillin has 2 episodes where he's torn about his abilities, and 18 gives him some tough love, encouraging him to fight his fears when him and Goku go to the Forest of Terror. Then episode 84 had 18 save Krillin when Goku was going too far with their training and reminding him it's a team tournament. Then in episode 99 for the survival tournament, her and Krillin save each other and double team against Sosha with a combo attack where the move goes bigger and bigger the more they bounce off each other for 18 to finish it, and it really shows they work well together as a team. So it's not that they're a bad battle couple, but they just need more time in the story. On the opposite end is a battle couple where they just suck at getting together to the point their attempt at a kiss ended up having a return to the past. And for all my nostalgia fans, type Code Lyoko is awesome in the comments because yeah, despite my issues with these two taking so long to sort of get together, even in season 4's ending and evolution, it's kind of implied that Yumi and Ulrich are in between dating and being official. But that being said, they do work pretty well together on missions when they aren't being foolish with their feelings. I mean, they both develop an attraction with each other based on their love for martial arts, and for the most part, they really work well together. Like, if you see the special edit version of this video, you're gonna see the clip where she throws a Tessin, and when it gets deflected, he catches it and throws it back. It's a little choppy, but it was 2007 animation, so I'm not gonna be too mad. Really, the only problem is just like the romantic progression, because it's always a step forward and a step back, despite the fact that even William points out that Ulrich was in first place in her heart. Also, whatever that season 5/6/ potential reboot is, just give William a girlfriend to help him move on from Yumi. Just build it up. Also, we are not a Jeremy X Lita slander channel. Tap your leader in the comments because I love a healthy relationship, and their issues are mostly revolved around their insecurities that push the other person to understand them better, help, and accept, which they do. And finally, oh, I forgot to talk about Shield Hero. Okay, Robin and Starfire. Considering their story is like 68 episodes if you break the movie into 3 parts, by Shonen Jump standards, that's not too bad. Though, to say Starfire's relationships are underused, debatable because she has good episodes with Cyborg and Raven, with Starfire being more appreciative of Robin helping her, and Robin starting to notice her jealousy of Blackfire, while Starfire has to prove and fight his obsessions with Slade, forcing Robin to kind of be honest with her more often, and every season has at least 1 episode focusing on them, leading up to the movie with Robin having to learn that, yeah, they can be more than just heroes. And yes, I do love Robin being a Giga Chad, but remember, at least in the context of the show, Robin is still a human being with feelings and emotions, and you can't just repress those. I know, repressing does not make you strong, and stoicism can't solve everything. When you have feelings for someone, you can't just be quiet and expect things to resolve if you aren't being honest with them. And Starfire lets both his human and hero side leading to the kiss. And whenever they do work together in a fight, they are pretty awesome. And if we were to consider Teen Titan as more shonen inspired, he fits on that mold of the more serious, competent protagonists whose issues come from their own insecurities than their lack of ability and intelligence, akin to Boruto and Ichigo. But his romantic feelings actually get put into question a lot more, and I think for those type of characters, Robin is a good template to address why those type of characters end up with their emotions. Because while those are types of characters get a little bit of unfair slack, because some people see them as bland despite the depth behind who they are, sometimes writers tend to keep that part of a characterization a little bit too subtle and not explore as much as they could. Okay, Shield Hero. In a vacuum, I like Nafumi and Raphtalia's relationship. A guy falsely accused of a crime he didn't commit, having to go through questionable means in order to acquire a slave to help him. He actually treats and sees as a person, and he acts as a shield while she acts as a sword. As both of them grow and evolve throughout the story, he starts to shed his grumpiness while she becomes more confident. However, when it comes to the discourse, I feel people need to understand that false allegations and real allegations do have their own levels of mental severity, and even though one is worse than the other, both of them have their own psychological damage, and we should be respectful to any victims while also making sure we are supporting them, and not necessarily use what happened in order to generate gender wars, when that would be a terrible situation for anyone of any gender to get involved with. 2. I understand the slave crest not being used for its intended purpose, with him transferring it as a power boosting ability as a symbol of trust, but it's still a binding contract, and it feel like it'd be better if he at least tried to evolve or find a spell with similar attributes would actually focus on said trust. 3. Well, I don't have too many problems with the rapid aging because personally I don't know what her age is, and the physicality versus year span is something I don't have that knowledge on. There is a valid to be had in that you kind of have to make sure your romance doesn't look like grooming, since in general, especially with certain genres of romance, some age gaps are just kind of effing weird. But other than that, solid idea. So, are there any couples where I have no issues with and actually have 2 characters in the main cast to fall in love with each other and are mostly equals in combat, even if one is the main protagonist and the other one is the deuteragonist? Yes! let's finally talk about Siren. The way the first volume sets up their dynamic is pretty good, since we understand that while they haven't been close in a while, Ahega values her as his childhood friend because she was the one who helped him get through his mother's death. But now she's the one who's become more jaded and cynical thanks to her Siren trips, which presumably ended up with her seeing others die. And she asks him to save her before she gets sent to Siren, with him going afterwards. She's still drained, but with her sword and power, she's able to stop a taboo, and Ahega's able to use her sword to finish it off and get both of them home. After that, she helps him out with his training, leading to the next missions, especially since other people start showing interest in our lead delinquent, yet she's still able to use her own techniques in order to beat some of the villains, either on her own or alongside him, or when they divide and conquer. And during a mission where they're trying to protect someone, all of the struggles and manifestations that she has been feeling resulted in a personality that represents the type of person she wants to be, including a confession that Ahega accepts. But after that's out of the fold, both of them have to talk about their feelings, and they almost kiss before they got interrupted. But after they go to the future and there's a raid on the hero's base takes place where they weren't able to help certain people out, Ahega asks for his father for the power, allowing them to combine all their forms of the psychic abilities for a power-up. And Sakurako also asks to do so since he can't do it alone. And while they also have to endure the pain of their souls awakening and accepting the upgrade, she struggles until he takes her hand, and together they slowly accept it. As it starts to stabilize, he thanks her for helping out with his mother's death, and he admits that since he chased her when she was asking for help, now he realized that he loved her and still loves her. As he says that, she thinks about all the hardships she had to endure, and how thanks to him she's finally allowed to let herself cry, knowing that her feelings and his feelings are the same. And together they go into the battlefield ready to fight and defeat their respective opponents and commanders. Outside of the fact that they did not kiss, both of them have their moments where they work together and moments where they divide and conquer. But unlike some couples, they actually do confess their feelings, so that's pretty much the ideal. And then came a recent series. Red Ranger Isekai has Togo, aka Kazuna Red, and Yidra, who are basically this in a nutshell. Red comes from our world and gets reincarnated after a fight with the main villain, trying to find a way back. Meanwhile, Yidra wants to reclaim her family's role as a top wizard who supports and funds magic for the public by allowing people safe and open access to magic that was changed when one of the wizards who defeated her father was placed in charge. And they do work together, since in some instances he's the brawn while she's more of the brain, trying to figure out both his powers, as well as how his powers can figure out a way to defeat the demon generals of that world. And while she does seem to be the weaker of the two, it's because of those studies she ends up finding a way to use his powers in order to not only help herself become stronger, but also have them and the rest of her teammates be able to get a lot of crucial victories against some of the bad guys. Not to mention, with her plotline, she goes through a lot of mental twists and turns, since her dreams aren't exactly easy to accomplish, and it's only through talking with Red after initially getting mad at him that she's able to figure out how to course correct and come up with a solution that's more realistic but beneficial towards herself and her rival. That also helped her realize that she did fall in love with him, and it's later revealed that he fell in love with her at the same time, but he's been scared and lost and responsible for another person's death that he talked himself out into believing that they were only friends. Plus, I can't say everything because the anime has only been up to like the first 13 chapters, so I need to be very risky about talking the manga spoilers, but their later power-ups come from the fact that they kind of have to address both their feelings and insecurities, especially given that underneath our Red Ranger's idealism hides a lot of dark thoughts about his identity that really only she can understand thanks to all the time they spent together and what she studied about him. They are a very good example of a battle couple because they ultimately have similar goals, but their personalities clash and bond because of how different they are in their similarities, while also making sure that their strengths make up for each other's weaknesses. Since despite his strengths, he is still new to that world, and despite her being a member of the world, she is going to need someone to help her accomplish her dreams that she can confide in and trust in. Plus, unlike the last couple, there's actually a kiss, but I won't give you the details behind it. You'll have to find that out for yourself, or whenever season 2 or 3 comes out. I'm not exactly sure when that would fit in, but yeah, these are my golden standards when it comes to battle couples. Both leads getting enough time to focus and care about one another, while also being able to have their own independent moments and times as a couple to shine. Now, there are a few more examples I want to talk about before I conclude, but there are just a few things I need to address. Part 3, working through a power imbalance. There's this idea that when it comes to writing boys media that the girls have to be one step behind the guys even if they're involved. Technically, ultimately depends on what the story is going for, since that isn't inherently a bad thing, since you are going to have that one main protagonist, and usually in boys media the story is going to center around the guy, with Dandadan being the exception. And if you're wondering how come I haven't talked about Dandadan for this video, I haven't watched all of it and I've only gotten my information from research and recaps, but these two are a good example of what I'm talking about, because Momo is considered the main character, and though Okurun's powers are theoretically more physically impressive than her in nature, Not only did she perform better in the first fight that they had when they both unlocked their powers, but they're practically equal when it comes to figuring out how their powers work and when it comes in clutch. So I think it's a good example of how you can have your male and female leads start at the same level and progress around the same level, but in different ways. And because Danadon's plot is more centered around their city, they have more time and options to basically flesh out the relationship, both during their big plot moments and when it's time to have some breather moments in between some of the big arcs. What I'm talking about is when there's one character who's clearly meant to be stronger than the other one and has more importance, but you still want the love interest to actively be involved and contribute in some way. I've heard that the Sailor Moon manga and anime did a good job and bad job of this respectively, but I think a good example of this would be Steven and Connie from Steven Universe. If you're watching the special version of this video, you know exactly where I'm going with this. I might get flagged for this, but one of the things I liked about Steven Universe is I was able to switch between having these more grounded moments where you got to know the rest of the cast and the city. So when the big moments happened that impacted the town and everything, you would actually feel bad for most of the people involved. And having Connie as a love interest and friend actually gave Steven someone more human he can bounce off with more consistently. And Connie has a fair amount of character development. She's pretty shy and nervous, but she slowly becomes more confident and independent. She eventually realizes how hard Steven's life really is for him and promises to try to be there for him in the same way. She didn't initially have a great relationship with her parents, and she did suffer from anxiety, but she's gotten better at handling it since she met him. And not only does she help him out in some of the corrupted gem battles, but she also ends up taking training from Pearl to also improve, to the point where she and Steven actually hold their own against Pearl pretty decently, even though she wasn't being too serious. But they did beat the Hollow Pearls, and they also did a combo attack in Nightmare Hospital. They eventually fused into Stefani and defeated them, and oh yeah, they beat Jasper! Like, why does no one talk about that? That's awesome and insane. It's like I said in the Siren example. Ahega doesn't know as much PSI training as Sakurako, but his powers are stronger in nature, so he's able to not only keep up with, but also do a lot more damage. Like, you're gonna have the female or main lead be the stronger one. The other person can still catch up to their level and surpass them or still be around their level. They may be at different power levels in terms of ability, but you can still have them be both useful and work together if the situation calls for it. And we can learn from non-romantic battle duos and potential couples. I want to talk about a few examples from shows where they aren't necessarily a couple or a battle duo, that actually some people would want to be a couple or just work together, which you could apply in any sort of battle series that involves romance. Starting with Yuji and Nobara. I talked about Jujutsu Kaisen before, but with Yuji and Nobara, Yuji's close range and Nobara's long range tactics and her strategy with ending up with them being able to work together against Eso and Kechizu was pretty well regarded. And while she isn't as physically gifted as Yuji or gets a mentor to help her hone her skills amongst the teachers, if you were to use her dynamics as inspiration for your own battle couple, you could have the weaker person have their special abilities be skill-based to make up for the lack of strength that the other person has. Moving back to Demon Slayer, let's get this out of the way. Tanjiro and Nezuko romantic pairings are downright disgusting, and I expect that type of nasty plotline in a smut parody. But if you want to make a action romance or a Shonen Jump series, you can take their template with one of the leads being normal, having to be a practitioner of a martial art, and the other lead being related to the antagonist and having antagonistic abilities. After all, they've worked together against the handball duo, Ruri, and some of the upper moons from my knowledge. You could basically write a story where those two or someone with those vibes were close friends or form an enemies to lover situation where they either have known each other and continue their journey, or they see each other as the entity before realizing that they have something in common and working together on a search for revenge and restoring their humanity respectively. The only thing I will say to avoid is people have criticized Nezuko for not being able to speak. My real problem is that when she meets their first mentor, instead of having him teach her how to control the bloodlust or desire or show her perspective, they just do a simple brainwashing, and it kind of just robs the heroine of any agency about overcoming that type of struggle, which you kind of want to see happen. Like, you can have a relationship that's romantic where one person is selectively mute or actually mute. Like, Kazumi-kun can't read the room is right there. From Beyblade X, these two aren't a couple, but people ship them for valid reasons, and that's Bird and Multi. He barely wins, but she sees how much effort he's putting into it, and she sees the growth and potential that he's going through, while he's also her shoulder to lean on whenever she's dealing with something personal, like the fact that he inherited a Beyblade that was originally meant for her sister. And they haven't had a tag battle in the anime yet, but in the manga, they did against Yggdrasil, where Bird lost first, but his extreme dash did enough damage to allow Multi to finish off one of her opponents, and I hope to get to do something similar in the anime. Miko and Fi from the very underrated Glitch Techs aren't a couple, and understandable. The crew wanted a healthy platonic relationship, and there's already a girl in the cast with a crush on Five in Zara who actually asked Miko about the relationship just to be safe. I ship it. But Miko and Five on their own do have a lot of fun chemistry. He's into classic games, gaming history, trivia, and is intelligent but lacks confidence, and she's got a love for RPGs and action-oriented games with very little patience. So he's the brains while she's a brawn. But they end up learning from each other and on their own, and since they're co-protagonists, they're practically equal in the plot. And if some people are brave enough to actually just make the heroine the co-protagonist, we wouldn't have this problem. And finally, we have Olivia and Elliot from Law & Order Special Victims Unit, which you might be surprised that I'm actually including them, but the problem is they aren't together and still haven't been for years. Something people have actually been waiting over 2 decades for, and I respect the patience and the fact that the show didn't give in and just kill his wife off, to the point that these two actually had a moment in the special intro, but I had to cut it since it wasn't fluid enough. And since Elliot's wife was killed off and they actually handled it with a lot of respect and grace, after season 22 and with organized crime, the real question becomes how come they haven't just done it yet, and everyone in both seasons have been asking that. But even as friends, they bounce off each other pretty well, since until Olivia had a son, he was basically the only person that was close to her that well to understand her. And in Elliot's case, anytime he was dealing with something like a divorce, she would be his voice of reason. So that's another example that can work well. So, how could this have worked and helped out other certain shows and Shonen Jump titles? Well, I had a miniature subject for how this could have helped, but I didn't really have a list of them. Like, Yu-Gi-Oh! Kind of has a problem in that its female leads until 7s kind of got shafted a lot, and given that tag duels are a great way for certain characters to interact and bounce off each other, having them team up in a tag duel would have been pretty interesting. Like, GX came pretty close, but the problem was that Jaden was kind of being a jerk to Alexis. Plus, imagine losing the title of love interest to the non-binary ghost who was kind of responsible for killing you off a season ago. Heck, Yubel would technically count, although a part of Jaden is not necessarily dueling alongside him. Some might say 5Ds and Akiza and Yusei duel together, but that was part of an elimination tournament style for the RGP. She didn't really have a tag duel where they were basically working together side by side. And who wouldn't want to see a synchro fusion between Stardust and Black Rose Dragon? Hell, in Yu-Gi-Oh! Reigns, one of the subplots was Yusaku needing Aoi and Go's help to beat the Knights after they proved themselves. And yeah, Aoi and Go were taken out immediately in their next duel. Here's a thought: have Yusaku work with Aoi against Spectre, since a villain that requires 2 protagonists to work together to beat him would actually make the defeat more satisfying. Alright, that was the pros and cons of over 30 battle couples and how some could have handled them better. Finally, oh no you're not. How are you gonna make an entire video about romance starting with the KKK as a punching bag and not address the fact that every couple you mentioned were Asian, white, or interracial? You didn't bring up any black guy or black girl couples at all. I wonder if the media industry has a problem with never having black couples in the lead for an action, adventure, fantasy, or sci-fi story, and the fact that black authors are pressured to have a white love interest to appeal to the biggest target demographic possible, since a fan emailed one to make one of the protagonists white. But if I had to address, the closest examples I can find are Sinners. Smoke and Annie work together and deal with the vampires, but both of them are dead by the end of the film. Scream Resurrection. Dion/Marcus and Liv end up being the only black couple not only in the Scream franchise to actually survive, but the 3rd black character to survive against a Ghostface killer. And yes, Kim survived too and got to shoot them before they come back for one last scare kill, but not only is she black, the 2 defeated her first, so I say it counts. What about Alia and Nino from Miraculous? They're fine. Well, the 2 problems are how they got together was entirely off screen, and that kind of diminishes the idea that black romances aren't something that deserves screen time and attention, and that Nino especially doesn't give much of an arc or focus compared to his girlfriend, since the cliche of the best friends of the lead who are POC always end up together only really being a problem if they don't have much of a character. But Alia is cool at least. Okay, come on, there's gotta be at least one more couple. Oh, okay, for all my Spider-Man fans, Miles actually has a black girlfriend in the comics, Tiana Toombs, aka Starling, the granddaughter of Adrian Toombs, aka the Vulture, who kinda has a brutal streak, and Miles has to talk her out of her extreme actions, but people have complained that her contributions after a certain point revolves only around the relationship without introspection on her personal life. Yeah, that's it. Alright, now I'm done. How many words is this? 16,000! Oh god, recording this is gonna be a nightmare! So, here's a quick recap and conclusion. Battle couples are great and should be incorporated in not just Shonen Jump stories, but are an asset in boys' media overall. It shows the young boys that there are other girls that they can look up to besides their mother and or parent or sibling, and that in most areas there are women worthy of respect and women who do care for and respect men like there are in real life, and should reciprocate positively. Both characters will get enough time and characterization to be likable instead of one feeling like a waste of good potential. The female heroines can have their own personal arcs and individual moments to shine, so they don't feel overshadowed or robbed of character focus, but also having them work together in fights with the main character and their love interest would show why they'd be great together, given fights are a way to progress the plot in Shonen Jump. It's also important that in downtime, the love interest and the hero actually have non-combative moments together to show why they'd be a good couple, so that if they end up in the end, the romance feels more believable with 2 strong characters by the end of the story. But that's all I have for now. Thank you for watching. Let me know what your favorite couples are in fiction that fits this mold, and ones that I probably should have brought up but didn't get a chance to or just didn't have much experience with. Let me know. And BIP of Bizarre Interest Productions, thank you for all the support this year. And if this is my final video of 2025, thank you all for this incredible journey, and signing off.